The Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake, Book 1, Titus Groan. Early one morning. Spring had come and gone, and the summer is at its height. It is the morning of the breakfast, of the ceremonial breakfast. Prepared in honour of Titus, who is 1 year old today, it piles itself magnificently across the surface of a table at the northern end of the refectory. The servants' tables and benches have been removed so that a cold stone dessert spreads southwards, unbroken, save by the regular pillars on either side, which lead away in dwindling perspective. It is the same dining hall in which the Earl nibbles his frail toast at 8 o'clock every morning, the hall whose ceiling is riotous with flaking cherubs, trumpets and clouds, whose high walls trickle with the damp, whose flagstones sigh with every step. At the northern extremity of this chill province, the gold plate of the Groans, pranked across the shining black of the long table, smoulders as though it contains fire. The cutlery glitters with the bluish note. The napkins, twisted into the shape of doves, detach themselves from their surroundings for very whiteness, and appear to be unsupported. The great hall is empty, and there is no sound, save the regular dripping of rainwater from a dark patch in the cavernous ceiling. It has been raining since the early hours of the morning, and by now a small lake is gathered halfway down the long stone avenue between the pillars, reflecting dimly an irregular section of the welkin where a faded cluster of cherubs lie asleep in the bosom of a mildewed cloud. It is to this cloud, darkened with real rain, that the drops cling sluggishly and fall at intervals through the half-lit air to the glaze of water below. Swelter has just retired to his clammy quarters after casting his professional eye for the last time over the breakfast table. He is pleased with his work, and as he arrives at the kitchen, there is a certain satisfaction in the twist of his fat lips. There are still 2 hours to run before the dawn. Before he pushes open the door of the main kitchen, he pauses and listens with his ear to the panels. He is hoping to hear the voice of one of his apprentices, or any one of his apprentices, it would not matter which, for he had ordered silence until his return. The little uniformed creatures had been lined up in 2 rows. 2 of them are squabbling in thin, high whispers. Swelter is in his best uniform, a habit of exceptional splendour, the high cap and tunic being of virgin silk. Doubling his body, he opens the door the merest fraction of an inch and applies his eye to the fissure. As he bends, the shimmering folds of the silk about his belly hiss and whisper like the voice of far and sinister waters, or like some vast, earthless ghost cat sucking its own breath. His eye, moving around the panels of the door, is like something detached, self-sufficient, and having no need of the voluminous head that follows it, nor, for that matter, of the mountainous masses undulating to the crutch and the soft trunk-like legs. So alive it is, this eye, quick as an adder, veined like a blood alley. What need is there for all the cumulus of dull, surrounding clay, the slow white hinterland that weighs behind it as it swivels among the doughy, circumscribing wodges like a marble of raddled ice? As the eye rounds the corner of the door, it devours the long double line of skinny apprentices as a squid might engulf and devour some long-shaped creature of the depths. As it sucks in the line of boys through the pupil, the knowledge of his power over them spreads sensuously across his trunk like a delicious gooseflesh. He has seen and heard the 2 shrill whispering youths, now threatening one another with little raw fists. They have disobeyed him. He wipes his hot hands together, and his tongue travels along his lips. The eye watches them, Flycrake and Wrenpatch. They would do very nicely. So they were annoyed with one another, were they, the little dung flies? How diverting, and how thoughtful of them! They will save him the trouble of having to invent some reason or another for punishing a brace of their ridiculous little brothers. The chef opens the door, and the double line freezes. He approaches them, wiping his hands upon his silken buttocks as he moves forward. He impends above them like a dome of cloud. "Flycrake," he says, and the word issues from his lips as though it were drawn through a filter of sedge. "There is room for you, Flycrake, in the shadow of my porch. Bring your hairy friend with you. There is room for him as well, I shouldn't wonder." The two boys creep forward, their eyes very wide, their teeth chattering. "You were talking, were you not? You were talking even more garrulously than your teeth are now chattering. Am I wrong? No? Then come a little nearer. I should hate to have any trouble in reaching you. You wouldn't like to cause me any trouble, would you? Am I right in saying that you would not like to give me trouble, Master Flycrake? Master Wrenpatch?" He does not listen for an answer, but yawns, his face opening lewdly upon regions compared with which nudity becomes a milliner's invention. As the yawn ends, and without a suspicion of warning, his two hands swing forward simultaneously, and he catches the two little wretches by their ears and lifts them high into the air. What he would have done with them will never be known, for at that very moment when the hanging apprentices are lifted above the level of Swelter's throat, a bell begins to jangle discordantly through the steamy air. It is very seldom that this bell is heard, for the rope from which it is suspected, after disappearing through a hole in the ceiling of the great kitchen, moves secretly among rafters, winding to and fro in the obscure, dust-smelling regions that brood between the ceiling of the ground rooms and the floorboards of the first story. After having been reknotted many times, it finally emerges through a wall in Lord Sepulchre's bedroom. It is very rarely that his lordship has any need to interview his chef, and the bell, as it swings wildly above the heads of the apprentices, can be seen throwing off from its iron body the dust of 4 seasons. Swelter's face changes at the first iron clang of the forgotten bell. The gloating and self-indulgent folds of face fat redistribute themselves, and a syncophantism oozes from his every pore. But only for a moment is he thus, his ears gulping at the sound of iron. For all at once he drops Flycrake and Wrenpatch to the stone slabs, surges from the room, his flat feet sucking at the stones like porridge. Without abating the speed of his succulent paces, and sweeping with his hands whoever appears in his path as though he were doing breaststroke, he pursues his way to Lord Sepulchre's bedroom, the sweat beginning to stand out more and more in his cheeks and forehead as he nears the sacred door. Before he knocks, he wipes the sweat from his face with his sleeve, and then listens with his ear at the panels. He can hear nothing. He lifts his hand and strikes his folded fingers against the door with great force. He does this because he knows from experience that it is only with great difficulty that his knuckles can make any sound, the bones lying so deeply embedded within their stalls of pulp. As he half expected, all to be heard is a soft plop, and he resorts unwillingly to the expedient of extracting a coin from a pocket and striking it tentatively on the panel. To his horror, instead of the slow, sad, authoritative voice of his master ordering him to enter, he hears the hooting of an owl. After a few moments, during which he is forced to dab at his face, for he has been unnerved by the melancholy cry, he strikes again with the coin. This time there is no question that the high, long-drawn hoot which answers the tapping is an order for him to enter. Swelter glances about him, turning his head this way and that, and he is on the point of making away from the door, for fear has made his body as cold as jelly, when he hears the regular crick, crick, crick of Flay's knee joints approaching him from the shadows to his rear. And then he hears another sound. It is of someone running heavily. As the sound approaches, it drowns the regular staccato of Mr. Flay's knee joints. A moment later, as Swelter turns his head, the shadows break apart and the sultry crimson of Fuchsia's dress burns as it rushes forward. Her hand is on the handle of the door at once, and she flings it open without a moment's hesitation or a glance at Swelter. The chef, a mixture of emotions competing within him as might a group of worms make battle for sovereignty in the belly of an ox, peers over Fuchsia's shoulder. Not until he has recoiled from what meets his eye can the secondary yet impelling impulse to watch for the approach of Flay appease itself. Dragging his eyes from the spectacle before him, he is in time to shift his bulk a little to the right and so to impede the thin man's progress, for Flay is now immediately behind him. Swelter's hatred for Lord Sepulchre's servant has now ripened into a fester patch, and his one desire is to stop the breathing for once and for all of a creature so fleshless, and of one who raised the welts upon his face on the christening day. Mr. Flay, presented with the doming back and the splay-acred rear of the chef, is on edge to see his master who has rung his bell for him, and is in no mood to be thwarted, nor to be terrified at the white mass before him. And although for many a long stony night he has been unable to rest, for he is well aware of the chef's determination to kill him during his sleep, yet now, presented with the materialization of his nocturnal horror, he finds himself as hard as ironwood, and he jerks his dark, sour, osseous head forward out of his collar like a turtle and hisses from between his sand-coloured teeth. Swelter's eyes meet those of his enemy, and never was there held between four globes of gristle so sinister a hell of hatred. Had the flesh, the fibres, and the bones of the chef and those of Mr. Flay been conjured away and away down that dark corridor, leaving only their 4 eyes suspended in mid-air outside the Earl's door, then surely they must have reddened to the hue of Mars, reddened and smouldered, and at last broken into flame, so intense was their hatred, broken into flame and circled about one another in ever-narrowing gyres, and in swifter and yet swifter flight, until, merged into one sizzling globe of ire, they must surely have fled, the 4 in one, leaving a trail of blood behind them in the cold grey air of the corridor, until, screaming as they fly beneath innumerable arches and down the endless passageways of Gormenghast, they found their eyeless bodies once again, and re-entrenched themselves in startled sockets. For a moment the 2 men are quite still, for Flay has not yet drawn breath after hissing through his teeth. Then, itching to get to his master, he brings his sharp, splintery knee up suddenly beneath the balloon-like overhang of the chef's abdomen. Swelter, his face contracting with pain and whitening so that his blanched uniform becomes grey against his neck, raises his great arms in a clawing motion as his body doubles involuntarily for relief. As he straightens himself, and as Flay makes an effort to get past him to the door, with a jabbing movement of his shoulder, they are both frozen to the spot, with a cry more dreadful than before, the long, dolorous cry of the death owl, and of the voice of Fuchsia, a voice that seems to be fighting through tears and terror, cries loudly, "My father! My father! Be silent, and it will be better, and I will take care of you. Look at me, father! Oh, look at me!" I know what you want, because I do know, father, I do know. And I will take you there when it is dark, and then you will be better. But look at me, father, look at me. But the Earl will not look at her. He is sitting huddled in the centre of the broad carven mantelpiece, his head below the level of his shoulders. Fuchsia, standing below him with her hands shaking as they grip the marble of the mantel, tilts herself towards him. Her strong back is hollowed, her head is thrown back and her throat taut, yet she dare not touch him. The austerity of the many years that lay behind them, the chill of the mutual reserve they had always shown to one another, is like a wall between them, even now. It seems as though that wall were crumbling, and that their frozen love was beginning to thaw and percolate through the crevices. But now, when it is most needed and most felt, the wall has closed again, and Fuchsia dares not touch him. Nor dares she admit to herself that her father has become possessed. He makes no answer, and Fuchsia, sinking to her knees, begins to cry, but there are no tears. Her body heaves as she crouches below Lord Sepulchrave as he squats on the mantelpiece, and her throat croaks, but no tears relieve her. It is dry anguish, and she becomes older during these long moments, older than many a man or woman could ever understand. Flay, clenching his hands, moves into the room, the hair standing out rigidly like little wires all over his scanty flesh. Something had crumpled up inside him. His undeviating loyalty to the House of Groan and to his lordship is fighting with the horror of what he sees. Something of the same feeling must have been going on inside Swelter, for as he and Flay gaze at the Earl, there is upon their faces the same emotion translated, as it were, into very different languages. His lordship is dressed in black. His knees are drawn up almost to his chin. His long, fine white hands are curled slightly inwards as they hang over his knees, between which and his supported chin the wrists are wedged. But it is the eyes which strike a chill to the centre of those who watch, for they have become circular. The smile which played across his lips when Fuchsia had been with him in the pine wood is gone forever. His mouth is entirely expressionless. Suddenly, a voice comes from the mouth. It is very quiet.
"Chef? Your lordship,"
says Swelter, trembling.
"How many traps have you in the great kitchen?"
Swelter's eyes shift to left and right, and his mouth opens, but he can make no sound.
"Come, chef. You must know how many traps are set every night, or have you become slovenly?"
Swelter holds his podgy hands together. They tremble before him as he works his fingers between one another.
"Sir,"
said Swelter,
"there must be 40 traps in the great kitchen. 40 traps, your gracious lordship. How many were found in the traps at 5 o'clock today? Answer me." "They were all full, your lordship. All except one, sir." "Have the cats had them?" "The cats, I said, have the cats had them?"
repeats Lord Sepulchrave sadly.
Not yet," said the chef. "Not yet. Then bring me one. Bring me a plump one. Immediately. What are you waiting for, Mr. Chef? What are you waiting for?"
Swelter's lips move wetly.
"A plump one,"
he says.
"Yes, my lord, a plump one."
As soon as he had disappeared, the voice goes on.
"Some twigs, Mr. Flay. Some twigs at once. Twigs of all sizes, do you understand? From small branches downward in size. Every kind of shape, Flay, every kind of shape, for I shall study each in turn, and understand the twigs I build with, for I must be as clever as the others with my twigs, though we are careless workmen. What are you waiting for, Mr. Flay?"
Flay looks up. He has been unable to keep his eyes on the transformed aspect of his master, but now he lifts them again. He can recognize no expression. The mouth might as well not be there. The fine aquiline nose appears to be more forceful, and the saucer-like shape of the eyes holds within either sky a vacant moon. With a sudden awkward movement, Flay plucks Fuchsia from the floor and flings her over his high shoulder, and, turning, he staggers to the door and is soon among the passages.
"I must go back! I must go back to him!"
Fuchsia gasps. Flay only makes a noise in his throat and strides on. At first, Fuchsia begins to struggle, but she has no strength left, for the dreadful scene has unnerved her, and she subsides over his shoulder, not knowing where she is being taken. Nor does Flay know where he is taking her. They have reached the east quadrangle and have come out into the early morning when Fuchsia lifts her head.
"Flay," she says, "we must find Dr. Prune at once. I can walk. Please now. Thank you, Flay, but be quick, be quick. Put me down."
Flay eases her off his shoulder and she drops to the ground. Fuchsia has seen the doctor's house in the corner of the quadrangle, and she cannot understand why she has not thought of him before. Fuchsia begins to run, and directly she is at the doctor's front door, she beats it violently with the knocker. The sun is beginning to rise above the marshes and picks out a long gutter and a cornice of the doctor's house, and, presently, after Fuchsia has slammed at the door again, it picks out the extraordinary headpiece of Prunsquallor himself as it emerges sleepily through a high window. He cannot see what is below him in the shadows, but calls out,
"In the name of modesty and all who slumber, go easy with that knocker. What in the world is it? Answer me. What is it, I repeat? Is it the plague that has descended on Gormenghast, or a forceps case? Is it a return of midnight mange, or merely flesh death? Does the patient rave? Is he fat or thin? Is he drunk or mad? Is he—"
The doctor yawns, and it is then that Fuchsia has her first chance to speak.
"Yes! Oh yes, come quickly, Dr. Prune. Let me tell you. Oh please, let me tell you."
The high voice at the sill cries,
"Fuchsia?"
as though to himself.
"Fuchsia?"
And the window comes down with a crash. Flay moves to the girl, and almost before he has done so, the front door is flung open, and Dr. Prunsquallor, in his flowered pyjamas, is facing them. Taking Fuchsia by the hand and motioning Flay to follow, he minces rapidly to the living room.
Sit down, my frantic one," cries Prunsquallor. "What the devil is it? Tell the old prune all about it."
"It's father,"
says Fuchsia, the tears finding a release at long last.
"Father's become wrong, Dr. Prune. Father's become all wrong. Oh, Dr. Prune, he is a black owl now. Oh, doctor, help him, help him."
The doctor does not speak. He turns his pink, over-sensitive, intelligent head sharply in the direction of Flay, who nods and comes forward a step with the report of a knee joint. Then he nods again, his jaw working.
"Owl,"
he says.
"Wants mice. Wants twigs. On mantelpiece. Hooting. Lordship's mad."
"No," shouts Fuchsia. "He's ill, Dr. Prune, that's all. His library's been burnt. His beautiful library, and he becomes ill. But he's not mad. He talks so quietly. Oh, Dr. Prune, what are you going to do?"
"Did you leave him in his room?"
said the doctor, and it does not seem to be the same man speaking. Fuchsia nods her tear-wet head.
"Stay here,"
says the doctor quietly. As he speaks, he is away, and within a few moments has returned in a lime-green dressing gown with lime-green slippers to match, and in his hand a bag.
"Fuchsia dear, send Steerpike to me in your father's room. He is quick-witted and may be of help. Flay, get about your duties. The breakfast must proceed, as you know. Now then, my gypsy child, death or glory!"
And with the highest and most irresponsible of trills, he vanishes through the door.